Hi, this is Professor Swift, and today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the NFL and the Players Association and the contract negotiations that they have coming up. It's interesting because it's been quite a contentious 4 years of the last contract. So as we come up to the new contract, Melanie's going to explain the various issues which are mandatory subjects of bargaining. That means under the National Labor Relations Act that both the employer and the union have to negotiate over these issues to impasse. So let's start out with the first one, which is, it's revenue split.
So with the revenue split, the players and the union have to negotiate how much the players will get out of the revenues from the entire pot of money that's made from the NFL. And currently they get 47%. The players obviously would like more, and the NFL would prefer them to have less, if not the same amount. So it's a point of bargaining because they both want opposite things. And it's something that they have to negotiate, so they have to get somewhere on it.
Okay. Now, negotiating under the National Labor Relations Act, they're required to require mandatory subjects of bargaining. And it's interesting that revenue sharing is one of those mandatory subjects of bargaining. That means, as you said, that they have to bargain that to impasse before the employer could lock them out. And so revenue split, what are they getting right now?
Right now they're getting 14% of the entire pot of revenue.
Okay, so anything that comes in, they get 14% of that.
Or sorry, 47%.
Okay.
Yes.
They get that's a big difference. Okay, so
47%.
47% of whatever comes into the NFL, the players get.
Right.
And they divided it up.
Correct.
All right. And so now, because they want to improve their stadiums, they don't want to give them that much, correct?
Right. They want to get more stadium credits, which would come off of the revenue pot before the players' percentage comes out.
Okay.
So if an owner wants to improve their stadium, they can take stadium credits, which is already in the current CBA, but they've already used all the stadium credits from the current CBA.
Okay, good. Let's look at the next issue, which you've got, and that's the stadium credits that you were talking about, right?
Right. So the stadium credits, basically, the owners get to have a certain percentage of funding in order to do improvements on current or build new stadiums, whatever is deemed necessary, and that percentage comes off of the revenue before the players get their percentage of it. And the owners obviously want more, and the players also agree that that needs to be an issue. Like, they can't play on fields that are unsafe or are not kept up because they're obviously not going to have the revenue if the facilities aren't maintained. So they are kind of just trying to negotiate how much exactly the owners are going to get.
Okay, that makes sense, because probably the nicer the stadiums, the more people they
Right.
get. Okay, good. Except for the Bears in Chicago. But the Lions have a very nice stadium, don't they? So why aren't they winning? All right, let's move on. Okay, the next issue you have is a fully funded CBA.
So for the fully funded contracts, it is normal in other sports for players to have fully funded contracts, specifically in NHL. And they, in the NFL, it's not really done. I think it said there's only one player who has a fully funded contract, and that would be Kirk Cousins. And the players would like...
Now, what does that mean, a fully funded contract?
The way I understood it, a fully funded contract is that once the player signs the contract, they are guaranteed to be paid that amount for the entire length of the contract, regardless of their performance or if they're injured. So if you have a player that gets injured, they're still making the full amount of their contract, even though they're not playing.
Okay. And right now what happens is that if they get injured, it's possible they're just going to get workers' comp, right? Or if the injury is so bad, they could be just dismissed from the team.
Right.
Now, there's probably some provision in there for their health insurance, but as far as being paid the millions of dollars that we read about, that only happens if they complete the terms of the contract, correct? So they'd like to have more fully funded contracts. Is that reasonable as far as the amount of money that would cost the NFL?
From what I understand, it's not something that players are really willing to push for, and the implications of pushing for that would be that their contracts are either less money or they would get shorter contracts to try to mitigate some of that risk.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that makes sense though, doesn't it? Like they probably go for 2-year books versus 5. Okay, very good. And then the 18 games, I keep hearing about that. What is it with the 18 games and why is that such a big deal?
So the 18 games is, some owners have been pushing for 18 game seasons instead of 16. So instead of having 2 preseason games, they would move it over into the regular season and they'd play an extra 2 games in the regular season. And owners like that idea, and players are not thrilled about it, to say the least. One of their major points is that it would shorten their career length from like 3.4 years on average to 2.6, which is a major difference for them because they're only vested in their pension at 3 years. So it would mean a lot less players are vested in their pensions prior to retirement.
Oh, wow. Okay. And the average year of a player is 3. So if you add 18 games, 2 games, that's 2 more times each year that they could get hurt and then be knocked out of getting their pension.
Right.
So that seems like that's a pretty big deal.
Right. And the way it sounds is that players aren't going for it. And the only way that they'd be willing to is if they were getting something significant in return during negotiations.
Which is typical with negotiations. What do you think would be something that would be worth those 2 extra games each season of a contract, which is typically 4 years? So that's 8 more games that they'd have to play. What would be something that you think that they would go for in order to play 8 more games?
One thing that has been mentioned was if players were to get a significantly larger chunk of the revenue split. So if they were to get like 80% of the revenue split, they might be willing to take the risk of their careers being shortened because they make significantly more money. But other than that, it kind of sounds like it's a non-starter for.
All right. So the thing is, it always comes down to with collective bargaining agreements is money. But here, perhaps if you had a fully funded contract for 2 years, maybe people would be willing to do 4 more games in those 2 years. But you have to take into consideration CTE, whether or not the contract's fully funded, how much they're going to get with revenue. So they really have a lot of issues that they can play with in order to get a contract, right? Yeah,
there's a lot of things that they're willing to negotiate on in order to, if they really wanted to have an 18-game season, or if they really wanted any specific part of the negotiations, they have a lot of room to play with.
There's a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah.
Okay. Very nice. You want to say anything else?
I think that's it.
You did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.